Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about positive networking. It seems like something you're really interested in.
Yeah, I mean, you sent us a bunch of articles and excerpts from books, and I can tell you really want to go deeper than just the how-to stuff. You want to understand, like, the real philosophy behind networking, what makes it actually work. And I'm excited to explore that with you.
Hmm.
So there's one source that really jumped out at me. It's called Work the Pond. I mean, come on, a book about networking that uses frogs. I was sold immediately.
Oh.
And it seems like they really get that mindset shift we're talking about.
Hmm.
To help us unpack all this, we've got our expert on social dynamics with us. They're incredible at taking like really complicated ideas and making them into something we can actually use in our lives.
Well, thanks for having me. And you're absolutely right. That whole idea of mindset is super important. A lot of what you sent, especially Work the Pond, stresses that human side of networking. It's less about, racking up contacts and more about building genuine relationships, real ones. So like right away, Work the Pond kind of tackles this myth that networking is just a fancy way of saying sales, which honestly I'm so glad about because selling myself, not exactly my cup of tea.
Yeah, I get that. I don't think it's many people's idea of a good time. But what's really cool is that the book totally flips the script. It says the real key is focusing on what you can do for others.
Not what they can do for you.
Exactly. And that's what makes all the difference. It takes the pressure off. And you know what? That's when real connections can actually happen.
Okay, so instead of walking into a room thinking, okay, what can these people do for me? It's more like,
Who can I connect with here? What do I know that could be helpful to them? How can I actually be of service? It's a complete shift and it's powerful.
that makes so much sense. Like the focus isn't all on you anymore, and suddenly networking feels way more collaborative and, well, less icky. Okay, here's another myth Work the Pond goes after. The idea that networking is all about who you know. Honestly, a bit of a relief because my contact list is, well, let's say it's not exactly star-studded.
Right. And the book tackles that head on. It says, actually, it's often the people we only kind of know, those weak ties, who end up opening the most unexpected doors.
Really? Why is that?
Well, it comes from this really interesting research on something called small world networks. The basic idea is we're all connected by like a comprisingly small number of steps or handshakes.
Ah,
So even those random encounters you have, they can end up having a huge ripple effect.
okay, my mind is blown. So even if, I don't know, like the CEO of Google personally, the barista I chat with every morning could be a valuable connection.
Exactly. You just never know where a conversation might go or who that person might know. It's all about being open to the potential in every interaction.
So quality over quantity, even when it comes to networking. I like that. Now, we have to talk about this frog chain analogy. This is where Work the Pond gets really fun. So they have these categories for the people you're likely to meet while networking. You've got the frogs who are just starting out, then you've got the princes and princesses, the masters of networking, and of course there are the dreaded toads. I mean, even just the names are genius.
Yeah, you got to give them points for being memorable, that's for sure. But what's important, what the book really stresses, is that you shouldn't prejudge people based on where they fall on this chain. It's not about that.
Okay, so it's not like I should be trying to figure out who the princes are and only talk to them.
Right. It's more about understanding yourself, what your goals are, and no matter what, treating everyone with respect.
Because I guess even a frog today could be the prince of my network tomorrow.
Exactly. That's the real takeaway. The book's message is super clear. Treat everyone like royalty. You just never know how these relationships might unfold.
Okay, I am loving this whole royal treatment approach, but let's get into some of the more practical stuff, like what are some techniques Work the Pond suggests to make the most of these royal encounters? First up, and this seems so basic, but I'm so guilty of forgetting this myself, never leave home without business cards.
I know. It might seem a little old school in our digital world, but the book makes a really good point. Business cards, they're still like a physical representation of your brand, your first impression, but you can hold it.
And there's this hilarious story in Work the Pond about a business dinner where most people didn't have cards. Talk about a missed opportunity.
I know, right? But I think it highlights something important. It's not just about having a card. It's about having one that's well-designed and really represents you. They even have a whole chapter on card design, talking about readability, making sure your contact info is easy to scan, even cultural stuff like card etiquette in Japan.
Wow, card design is like a whole world unto itself. Taking notes. Okay, another tip I loved was the travel in pairs strategy for those networking events. Like the FBI, honestly, I love this idea. Networking can be so intimidating, especially if you're on your own. Having a tag teammate, someone to help with introductions and, just navigate those awkward moments. Genius.
What's really interesting is that the book uses this tag team concept for more than just professional networking.
Really?
Yeah, they even apply it to things like, well, romantic connections.
No way.
There's a story about a journalist who actually found love through tag team networking. It just goes to show you these connections can really impact your life in unexpected ways.
Okay, adding fine love to my networking goals list. But let's go back to the basics of working the pond, that first impression. The book gives some really good advice on how to make a good one, starting with eye contact, a firm handshake, and of course, remembering names, which, full disclosure, is where I usually fall apart. But Work the Pond has this cool technique. They call it the 3 times ribbit.
3 times ribbit.
Yeah. It's supposed to help you remember names. It's pretty simple, but apparently really effective. Basically, you repeat the person's name 3 times during your conversation. Once when you first meet them, and then a couple more times naturally throughout the chat. It's like, great to meet you, Sarah. So Sarah, tell me about your work. And Sarah, you were saying, might sound a little repetitive, but the book says it really helps to solidify that name in your memory.
There's actually science behind that. Repetition is a classic way to help encode information into our long-term memory. It's a simple learning technique, but it totally applies to networking too.
Brain hacks for the win. Okay, another simple but so important reminder from the book. Always introduce yourself by name, even if you think you've met someone before. I mean, we've all had that awkward moment where you treat someone like a stranger and it turns out you've actually met them before.
Oh yeah, a classic networking blunder. But the book uses this as a lesson in humility. Not everyone is going to remember us, and that's okay. It's about being gracious, assuming good intentions, even if someone seems to have forgotten.
Grace and good intentions. I like that. Definitely takes the sting out of those awkward moments. Now, Work the Pond also talks about a technique that I think a lot of people overlook, the power of asking questions.
Oh, questions are so important. They show that you're genuinely interested. They help you learn more about the people you're meeting. And honestly, they just lead to much more interesting conversations.
And Work the Pond, they even suggest asking questions, like during presentations or those Q&A sessions. They say it's a good way to introduce yourself to the whole audience, like position yourself as someone who's, engaged and in the know.
It's so smart, right?
Yeah.
To go from just passively listening to being an active participant.
Yeah.
Which definitely helps you stand out.
And they have this amazing story in the book. It's about this economist who really impressed a UN ambassador just by asking insightful questions after a presentation.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. It's a great example of how these little interactions can lead to big things. The ambassador was so blown away, he actually invited her to consult on a project.
Wow.
And it ended up shaping UN policy.
Seriously. So asking a question isn't just about getting information. It's about creating opportunities.
Exactly. It's strategic curiosity in action. And speaking of strategy, Work the Pond has some really great tips on how to make your questions really count.
Okay, I'm all ears. Question asking tips. Let's hear them.
Okay, so first, they say, try to sit in the line of sight of the speaker when you're at presentations. Not only does it make you more likely to get called on if you raise your hand,
Right.
It also makes you more visible to the audience.
That's clever. It's not just about the question itself. It's about being seen and remembered by everyone there.
Exactly. And then they talk about making sure your questions are really clear and concise and, relevant to what the audience is interested in. They even say, jot down a few questions beforehand. So you're not, scrambling for words when you get the mic.
That's a good tip. Preparation is key, especially if you get nervous about, speaking up. There's this great story in the book about this marketing executive, Julie Connolly, who went to an event for the Olympic bid committee.
Oh, yes. I love that one.
And she asked a question about how local businesses could get involved with the Olympics, and it sparked a whole new line of business for her company.
I know, right? Talk about a return on investment for asking one question.
Seriously. It's a perfect example of how a well-placed question can open these doors you didn't even know existed. All this talk about networking is making me want to sign up for that conference I've been putting off.
Well, that actually brings us to another point from Work the Pond. You can create your own WN networking opportunities.
Oh.
Yeah, they say if there's a speaker or an event you're interested in, why not just buy a ticket and invite someone from your network to go with you?
That's such a good idea. You get to learn something new and connect with someone you already know. It almost seems too easy. But then there's the whole follow-up thing. Ugh, that's where I really struggle.
I hear you. It's the Achilles heel for a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Like, life gets busy, and those promises you make to connect, they kind of just disappear. But, remember, Work the Pond is all about positive networking. So they have a ton of practical advice to make that whole follow-up thing feel less daunting.
Okay, I'm ready. Tell me everything.
All right, so first things first, organization. They really push using some kind of system to keep track of your contacts and like those follow-up promises you make. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be a simple spreadsheet, or you can use a contact management app. Whatever works for you.
Think of it as your network web,
Exactly, a way to keep all those valuable connections from falling through the cracks.
Love that.
And then they talk about making that follow-up feel personal and, meaningful.
Yeah.
They say, think back to that initial conversation you had. What were their interests? What were they struggling with? And then use that information when you follow up.
So instead of just sending a generic, hey, nice to meet you, email.
Right. You could share an article that's relevant to their work, offer to introduce them to someone in your network who could be helpful, or even just ask a thoughtful question about something they mentioned.
It shows you were paying attention.
Yeah.
And that you're actually, invested in building that connection.
Exactly. It takes follow-up from this chore to a genuine opportunity.
I like that. It's about keeping the conversation going. So what about when you drop the ball? When you completely forget to follow up and basically ghost someone?
Well, the book is actually pretty understanding about that. They get it. It happens to everyone. They say, just own up to it, apologize.
Okay, that's good to know.
Most people are pretty understanding, especially if you explain, you've been swamped.
Phew, good to know. It's good to remember we're all human, even in the, what did you call it, the network dance?
The network dance, exactly.
But, okay, what about technology? I mean, Work the Pond was written a while ago. Is the advice still relevant, in our super connected world?
Absolutely. They actually dedicate a whole chapter to using technology to make your networking even better.
Okay.
They talk about having a professional and active presence on platforms like LinkedIn, engaging with those online communities that, fit your interests, and using your online presence to really showcase your expertise.
So it's not just about those in-person events anymore. It's about building that digital network, too.
Exactly. And they also encourage using social media in a strategic way to stay in touch with people. Share articles they might find interesting, comment on their posts, and basically use those online interactions to spark real-world conversations.
So it's about weaving together those online and offline connections into this powerful network tapestry.
I love that, a network tapestry.
But even with all this technology, Work the Pond makes one thing super clear. Nothing can truly replace those face-to-face interactions.
Absolutely. That's such a good reminder. As much as we love those online connections, there's something special about meeting someone in person. That shared energy, the spark you get when you connect. You just can't replicate that through a screen.
So maybe we can use those online interactions as a starting point to set up those real-life meetings, coffee days, lunches, bring that network dance into the real world.
Yes, I love that. And in the end, I think that's really the essence of Work the Pond. It's about using everything we have, online and offline, to build a network that's both personally rewarding and professionally impactful.
So we've covered a lot of ground with Work the Pond today and really gotten into the nitty-gritty of positive networking. I feel like my whole outlook has changed. I'm ready to ditch all my networking fears.
That's awesome. I think you've hit on something really important. It's all about coming at networking with a different attitude, a different energy.
Yeah.
Embracing the network dance, right?
I love that. The network dance. Makes it sound way more fun, less stressful. Okay, before we send our listener off to hit the dance floor, let's recap some of the big takeaways from Work the Pond and our chat.
Sounds good. Let's break down all those networking gems.
All right, first and foremost, it's about shifting our focus. Instead of what can these people do for me, it's what can I do for others?
Right. Be generous, be helpful, be genuinely interested in the people you meet.
Exactly. It's such a powerful shift,
It really is. Takes the pressure off, lets us be our authentic selves, and that's where the truly meaningful connections come from.
And that's what it's all about, right? Real connections, not just collecting business cards. Second takeaway, treat everyone like royalty. Remember that whole frog chain thing?
Yeah.
Don't prejudge people based on where you think they stand.
Yeah, you never know. Someone's frog today could be the prince or princess of your network tomorrow.
Seriously.
Those relationships can evolve in surprising ways. Kindness and curiosity, they're your best tools.
Plus, it just makes the whole networking thing so much more enjoyable.
Right.
Third, recognize opportunities are everywhere. Networking isn't just about those big events or conferences. It's about being open to connecting with people in everyday life. At the coffee shop, the grocery store, walking your dog.
Absolutely. And don't forget, you can even create your own opportunities. Like we were saying, if you're interested in a speaker or an event, invite someone from your network to join you.
Right. Win-win. You get to learn something new, A&D deepen an existing connection. Fourth, never underestimate the power of questions. Asking thoughtful questions, it shows you're engaged, you're curious, you really want to get to know people. It's such a simple but powerful way to build rapport.
And like Work the Pond suggests, don't be afraid to ask questions during presentations or Q&As. Helps you stand out, shows you're a thought leader, and who knows, it might even open unexpected doors like it did for Julie Kiley.
And honestly, it's a great way to, get over those public speaking jitters.
Okay, last but not least, the magic of follow-up. Turning those initial encounters into real, lasting relationships. That takes effort, and it takes a real desire to stay connected, be reliable, be thoughtful, and always look for ways to add value to the lives of the people in your network.
Totally. And the book gives us great tips to make follow-up way less overwhelming. Use a system, personalize your interactions, be timely with your responses. It's all about turning those good intentions into consistent action.
So we've covered so much today, busted some myths, learned some great strategies, even got a few froggy lessons along the way. But what do you hope our listener really takes away from this deep dive?
I hope they walk away realizing that networking doesn't have to be this scary transactional thing. It can be fun, it can be joyful, it can be a genuine expression of who they are and what they care about. And honestly, that's when the real magic happens. Beautifully said. I think that's the perfect place to wrap things up. So to our listener, embrace that network dance, remember those froggy lessons, be generous with your connections, and see where those ripples of positive energy take you. And if you have any questions, or if you want to share some of your own networking adventures, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy networking. I'm